Before we display the block, let's go ahead and add a configuration to it. So go ahead and open up the 7th step file for the trails.module, which is labeled with hook block configure step, and copy all of the code. And again, we're going to paste it over the entire code in our Trails module and save it. The only difference in this new version is that we've added 2 new hook functions. Trails block configure, which is an implementation of hook block configure, and Trails block save, which is an implementation of hook block save. This pair of hooks allow us to define a configuration form for our block, and then to set a function that runs when that form is saved. Let's go ahead and take a look at this line by line. Our first step is to grab the value that we set in our configuration form for the maximum number to display in our maximum items select box. So we do that by grabbing with variable get the trails block max variable. If you remember, this is the variable that we set in the trails.admin inc file in our configuration form. Next, we're going to set a select box to display to allow a user to select any value from 1 up until this number that we just got. So we're going to use the form API to do this, so the structure should be very familiar to you because this is the same exact structure that we used for the configuration form. So we're setting a key for this input, and the key is simply the name of our input. And just like with our configuration form, we're going to use this name to save as a variable. So we want to make sure to prefix it with the name of our module. So this is called trails block num. We're setting the type to select. We're setting the label or title to number of items to show. We're setting the default value to the value of this variable currently, or if that's not set, we're setting it to the number 5. So this is the same variable get function that we've used throughout this module. And finally, we're setting the options, and we're using the same trick that we used with our configuration form. We're using Drupal map assoc to take a flat array and make it an associative array. And we're using the range PHP function to quickly create a range of values as an array from 1 to the maximum number that we set in our configuration form here. And finally, we're returning the form. Unlike our configuration form, we will need to manually save the value that was set for this. So this is why the hook block save function exists. One thing to point out here is that both hook block configure and hook block save get passed a single variable, which is the delta. The delta corresponds to the value that we set as the key in our block info file. So if we had multiple blocks, we would want to check to make sure that the block that gets this form is the correct block. So if we had multiple blocks, we would want to check to make sure that the delta equals history here and wrap that if statement around all of this code right here so that if somebody goes to configure another block, they don't get this form. The same goes with the hook block save function. We would want to wrap this code that we see here with an if statement that checks for the delta of history. Our hook block save function is actually very simple. All we're doing is taking the value that was saved in the form for our number of items to show and saving it as the variable trails block num. We do that by grabbing it from the edit array that gets passed to hook block save. Edit is an array, the keys of which are the form keys as well. So it's pretty straightforward. In order to save this value here, we would just say edit and then the key of that item. If we had numerous variables that we wanted to save, we would just repeat this for each variable. Let's see this in action. Go ahead and make sure that your module file is saved. And let's go to our block configuration page by going to Structure and Blocks. Scroll down to the history item right here and click the configure link. Now we have some default settings that come free with our block configuration form, like block title and specific region settings. But our special configuration item that we just added is right here, number of items to show. And this displays a number from 1 to that number that we set in our configuration form, which happened to be 18. We're going to go ahead and keep this at 5.